Welcome to the Wide Lens podcast, where expanding your perspective on recent history is our mission. Listen to untold accounts from overlooked voices and see familiar stories in a whole new light. Ready to dive deeper? Let's begin.
Hey folks, on this episode of the Wide Lens podcast, we are honored to welcome none other than Ralph Longfellow, a physicist, engineer, and a contributor to the Apollo 11 lunar landing on the moon. In fact, Ralph helped redesign the radar systems that guided Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin safely to the surface of the moon. And as we all know, his work became part of one of the most important achievements ever in human history. But Ralph's life, it didn't start there. In fact, he grew up on a sheep ranch near Indian Valley, Idaho, and later went on to study physics at the University of Idaho. He began his career working on microwave antennas for the Navy, then joined Ryan Aeronautical during the Apollo program, completely redesigning the radar front end, which became essential to the success of the mission. His career continued with major contributions to the Viking Mars mission, advanced navigation systems, and defense technologies. Outside of engineering, Ralph is an accomplished sailor who has crossed oceans and served as Commodore of the Coronado Yacht Club. Today, we will explore Ralph's journey, the pressure and precision behind Apollo 11, the legacy of the moon landing, and the stories that defined his life and career. Ralph, welcome to the Wide Lens podcast. It is a true privilege to have you here with us today.
Well, thank you, Brad. I enjoy being here, and we'll go on.
Fantastic. Well, Ralph, like I said in my intro to you, which was, I'm actually like, folks, if you don't see this, I'm actually pinching myself right now that we have Ralph on the podcast. And that's because my good friend, Jim McMahon, is related to Ralph. And we were talking about the podcast, and he said, hey, I've got a cousin who helped out with the Apollo 11 moon landing. What do you think? I was like, are you kidding me? This is perfect for the podcast. So, Ralph, it is such a treat to have you. But before we get to the moon landing, Apollo 11, all that amazing work, we need to really set the stage. And so we're going to do that by understanding your early life and really what brought you through your story to get you into that place. And so, first question that I have for you is, you were, as I shared, you grew up on a sheep ranch pretty close to Council, Idaho. Tell us a little bit like that. What was it like growing up on that sheep ranch?
Well, I had two older sisters that cared for me occasionally, but it was a hard ranch. My dad started with 160 acres and let it grow as he built, and we wound up with 3,600 acres there. But I actually don't remember a whole lot other than I followed my father around all the time. It's things like that. I'm really a little out of it right here. This is, to tell you what it was dirt, a lot of dirt. But I had an enjoyable childhood. I don't remember ever being angry. My parents let me do the things I wanted to do that I could do. So it was a good childhood. I'm very, very happy with the way I grew up.
Now, tell us a little bit about that sheep ranch. How did your dad grow it to so many acreage? Did he have to hire hands to be able to do that? And then also, if you could make a guess, not going to hold you to it, but if you could make a guess, what was the number of sheep once you had the most sheep on that ranch? What would you guess that number of the flock to be? And what the heck did you guys do with the sheep?
Well, he started with the small band. He actually started during the 1930s when I was born. He had 150 head of cattle, and he had about 200 sheep. But when World War II started, he sold the cattle, bought more sheep, and before he moved the outfit to Oregon, which he did in 52, he had over 2,000 head of ewes, which made two bands of 1,000 ewes each. And when we take them to the high country in the summer as two bands, the ewes and lambs together would be about 2,500 head, because there'd be 1,500 lambs and 1,000 ewes in each band.
Was that a pretty large sheep ranch for that area? Was he known as the sheep rancher, or was that pretty common to have such a huge band like that?
That was pretty common. Dad knew other sheep owners who had bigger bands. Some had just a start, but he had enough bands to have a good life.
What would you say, like, what were the jobs that you as a boy had on that sheep ranch? What did he basically, I'm guessing you probably had to wake up super early and he gave you a big old set of chores to do. What did it look like for you specifically on that sheep ranch? What did he have you do?
On the ranch, as a young child, I just would get things. I was a gopher. Go get me the hammer. Go get me the shovel. Go get me this. That was my job as a 4 or 5 year old boy. I later grew into tasks like milking the cows. I learned how to milk cows. I learned how we had horses, so I started riding horses at a very early age. I would go on one of the horses and go out and get the cows and bring the cows in for milking. But when I was in school, we lived in town. I lived in town with either my sister, sometimes with my sister, and me would stay at my grandmother's house while we were in school. It wasn't until I was 10 years old that my dad bought a home in town, Council, where we would live during the school year.
And Ralph, how big was Council? Was that a pretty small town, but just
Yeah.
big compared to the ones around it?
Council was the county seat of Adams County, Idaho. It was probably the largest town north of Weiser. Weiser was larger than Council. Council had about 800 population, 700, 800 population. Adjoining towns to the south was Cambridge, which was probably around 600, 500, 600. And north and Meadows was probably around 400. Those,
So Weezer's famous, Ralph, you know this, it's famous for a fiddle festival that still goes on to this day. Did that exist when you were a kid?
no,
No,
no.
that's pretty
I remember when I was gone. I had left the country then, but by then, Council has a well, I don't think they don't call it a fiddle contest. They just have a music festival in Council every summer.
Well, for folks that don't know Weiser, Idaho, that is in the southwest area of Idaho. And it is not spelt like the band Weezer, which happens to be one of my favorite bands. It's spelt a bit differently than that. And I first heard about that, even though I grew up pretty close to Weezer. I remember first hearing about Weezer, Ralph, on a TV show called Head of the Class. And the teacher was from Weezer, Idaho. And I remember looking at a map going, where the heck is Weezer? And it turned out it was like maybe an hour and a half from where I grew up in Eastern Oregon. And it was just exciting whenever you'd hear these obscure Idaho town names in popular culture, because not to dismiss Eastern Oregon or rural parts of Idaho, but there's so few people that live out there that folks you don't hear about it that much across the United States. So I'm sure that for a lot of folks, when you would tell people, when you were moving around the country and telling people where you were from in Idaho, I'm sure there's a lot of head scratching that happened. Is that right?
Yes, it is. And Weiser was where my dad banked originally. So we would have to go to Weiser every once in a while to take care of banking things. And what I enjoyed doing as a child then was I would go down to the south to the railroad station because Weiser is on the main line of the Union Pacific that goes to Portland. And the big malleys and freight trains would roll through Weiser, not even slow down. And I loved to watch the trains.
Were those the same? Was that the same train line that would go through La Grande, Oregon?
That's the same one.
Fantastic. Well, you were talking about your horses a bit, and you shared a bit of a story with me, Ralph, around a time when you were breaking two horses with your dad. And those horses, which awesome that you can remember their names. I'm sure you were close to them. They were Powder and Star. Those were the names of the two horses. Tell us a little bit about breaking those two horses with your dad, and what did that experience of breaking those horses do to teach you about, about patience, about follow through, about trust? What did you learn with your dad breaking horses like that?
Well, it was an interesting experience. I had helped him in the past, but this time, as we were doing it, Dad said, "Son, the bay, which was Powder, is your horse." And I was so excited. I had another horse. I had a horse when I was younger that that we lost. So I was glad. It turned out to be a very big summer for me. I was 13 years old, and when it came time to take the sheep to the high country, I wound up riding Powder, the one we broke, leading the pack string. Because Dad rode Star. Star, the big black, was a quarter horse, and he was real skittish, kind of hard to handle. But Dad stayed with him. We had some experiences that summer on the trail, but I was 13, but I was just doing the job. I didn't think anything about it being important as a child. I didn't think of it as a child. I thought of it as another person doing a job.
You referenced Star, and I guess your dad probably knew just, horses like people, they can be trained, they can be taught, but also they just have an innate personality to them. And
Yes, they do.
he looked at those two horses and said, "Okay, Powder for my son, Star for me." And the reason for that, I'm guessing, Ralph, was that Powder was just a little bit more easy to train and maintain like that. And Star, he was famous for bolting and bucking and eventually even being sold to a rodeo. He almost really became a legend. How did handling that horse really shape your confidence as a young teenager working with a horse that had such a strong personality like that?
I only had one incident with Star because Dad really stayed with Star, and I stayed with Powder. But we were packing up and getting ready to go to one of the campsites on the trail when I was hanging on to the lead line for Star when he kind of bolted, but I quick got the line around a tree and stopped him. And my dad was he lectured me on that. He said, "Son, you really took a risk because if you hadn't got that around the tree, he would have taken all the hide out of your hands."
Absolutely. He was looking out for the best of you and saying that and guiding you like that. Did you ever get a chance to see Star perform in a rodeo when he
Oh
wasn't
yeah.
under your care anymore? What was that like? Were you able to,
Well, there was a road.
be sitting in the stands with your friends and say like, "Hey, that's Star. That was on our ranch."
Not only that, I went down to the catching pins before he performed because he was a performer and climbed up on the fence. And he came over. Star came over. Star was gentle. Let me tell you, he was gentle. You just couldn't ride him. And he came over, and I scratched his ears and petted him. And you could see at the rodeo where they get the horses ready in the chute. Star just stood there. They saddled him up. He just stood there. The cowboy got on. He just stood there. The cowboy said, "Go." They opened the gate. The Star jumped out, took about 3 jumps, went up one direction, came down in another, and the cowboy came down where Star had been.
Star knew exactly
And
what.
he was not called Star then. The radio string that ran the horses called him Double Ought, Double Ought.
Double
And
up.
my dad called the brand Double O because that's what our brand was two O's tied together. Some people called it Lazy Eight, but my dad called it Double O. And the bucking string, you could hear it on the shooter. Now coming out of chute number 9 on Double O is so and so.
That's great. How did it change to double lot from double O? Was that just like they just got it confused and named him
Yeah,
something
well,
wrong, or
they thought it sounded better on the PA system as Double O.
it does sound good. It does sound good. That's cool. Sounds like a really fun, healthy childhood growing up in Southwest Idaho. Speaking of growing up there, you also shared with me about a time when a swarm of ground hornets went on and started chasing you one summer. I don't know much about that story, so Ralph, tell me a bit about that. What the heck happened?
Well, that goes to the summer I was 14. The fall that summer, as it approached, Dad says wanted to know if I would take a band for the summer. He says, "I've got a band of 500 yearlings. I need somebody to take care of them, and I'll pay you like a herder's wage to take care of them for me this summer." So I took the job, and we kept them in a pasture area in Long Valley, which was over east of our ranch, over the mountain, West Mountain into Long Valley. And one day, as I was tending them, some of them got into an adjacent field, so they had got through the fence. And I went around and got them back through the fence. But as I was pushing the last ones through the fence, I noticed they had disturbed a ground hornet's nest. And a swarm of ground hornets came out looking for something, and I could see they were looking for me. I took off running and ran all the way back to my tent, which is where I lived that summer, and they never caught me.
Goodness. And if they would have, that would not have been a pretty picture at all.
I guess.
So, question that I've got for you, I want to hear more stories. I got some more stories that I want you to share. But taking a little bit of a turn here, this is a young man working on a sheep farm, and he goes on and he is a part of getting the first man to land on the moon. That was a huge win in the space race. You were probably a really interesting kid on that farm, and you really loved the simplicity and the value that ranch life brought. But tell me a little bit about, like, your love of science as a little boy, and maybe your love of science and physics, and how did you start seeing that really take shape when you were on the ranch? Can you remember, like, I've got 3 kids myself, and I've encouraged them to really step into their natural passions that they have that are good and that are healthy. And you had a passion for science, and it just came real naturally to you. How did that take shape in such a peculiar place like a sheep ranch?
Well, there's always something that with your curiosity. I don't remember this particular story, but my mother has told it several times that I can remember through her. I I don't know what age I was. I think I was about 4 when I was pestering her in the kitchen. She decided to get me out from under her. She took the old broken alarm clock and gave it to me with a little screwdriver that came out of her sewing machine. She said, I was in there in the living room for a while. Quietly, 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 she went in and found out, and there was that alarm clock in pieces scattered all over the floor.
How did she respond to that? Did she
She
basically
did. She just went back to. She says, "Well, that's got him busy. I'll have to clean that up." But the next time she went back, it was back together, and then it worked.
So you were able to take that thing apart, figure out how it works. This is, of course, before the internet where you can follow a tutorial. You had to mentally watch it disassemble, and then you had to mentally take that same artifact and pull it back together again. And that's something that sounds like it came real natural to you, and you really enjoyed it.
I think I probably had the ability to see where the parts went when I took it apart and know the difference in one part from another part and just put them back together like I took it apart. And in doing so, clean the dirt out of it or whatever it was that had stopped it.
How
And
did
now it
your
worked.
how did your dad deal with that, Ralph? I mean, he's a man who owns this big sheep ranch. He's a real practical man. He grows it to a pretty large size, and he has this son, and it sounds you were the only son, is that right?
That's correct.
So you're the only son, and in his mind, this little baby boy comes and says, "Okay, I'm gonna pass this sheep ranch off to him. I'm going to teach him to live and be like me." And then he sees that he's got a boy that really respects and loves and enjoys being with his dad, but has his very different talents and gifts and desires than he has. How does your dad deal with the fact that your dad was a real practical man and he has this little boy who's incredibly cerebral and really inquisitive like that? Was that hard for him, or was that something that he encouraged?
Well, he encouraged my curiosity, and I think he realized. Well, he didn't really. He tried a number of times to pique my interest in the business.
Mhm.
One time when I was a sophomore in high school in January, he took me out of school and we went to the Wool Growers Convention in Chicago.
What was that
Now,
like? What happened there?
I had no interest in the meetings that he went to and the things. So I got on the L that we were staying at a hotel, which is in the north end of town, and rode the L into the loop, got off, walked around the downtown Chicago for a while, looked at everything and got back and spent the day just exploring.
Mm, mm.
So that was a second time. The first time was when he had me take a band for the 3 months in the summer. It was after that summer when I was 14. I had the band. After that summer, the next summer, he asked if I wanted to take a band again. I said no. I think I will do something different. So I looked for other work. He could tell that I had no interest in the sheep business, and yet he encouraged my interest in what I had. I will never forget. It was after I joined the Navy when I was home on leave that he asked me if I wanted it, and I told him I really didn't have any interest in the business. My reply was I could probably lose money in it faster than he'd made it.
That's some
And he
sincerity
says,
for you.
and his comment was, he says, I kind of knew that, son, but I had to ask you.
Good dad. Good dad. What happened to the ranch? Did he go on and sell that to a competitor, or what did he do with it?
Well, eventually in 1952, he moved all the sheep to a ranch. He bought a ranch in Oregon on the Snake River.
Hmm.
I was in high school at the time, and he moved the whole sheep outfit to Oregon to a ranch on that banked on the Snake River. There were no roads to it. It was about 6 miles on a side total, but most of it was government land that had the grazing lights to the ranch. It's a much bigger ranch.
Why did he move it, Ralph, to that area? What made him decide that it needed to be moved over to the Snake?
He was getting too big for the 1,300 acres.
And then
And
after,
and a friend of his, Lim Wilson, who was also in the sheep business, had a ranch on the Snake River and called my dad and told him this place was for sale that my dad bought.
huh,
That he ought to just get into business over there, and he did. It was a good move for him.
And then after that, did he just sell the ranch to
He
someone?
sold
Or
he first he leased it to a cattle outfit because it had grazing rights for cattle on West Mountain, and then he eventually sold it.
gotcha.
I made it. I'm This is a comment. When he set me down and told me he sold it and he laid out how much he sold it for and everything, and I said, "Well, Dad, you made a lot of money in real estate." And he said, he looked at me and he says, "Son, but those woolies paid the bills."
Oh, that's good. What a great response. It's funny that you mentioned that. The whole McDonald's model, like where all the money comes from, is the hamburgers pay the bills, but they make all their money in real estate. That's where it all comes from. So super similar. Ralph, tell us a little bit about what school was like for you because you were on a ranch and you were pretty far from any area. Did she just teach you at on the ranch, or were you able to go to a little schoolhouse? What did that look like?
Well,
Where'd you go?
I always I always went to school in council. I either lived at or with my grandmother, or by the time I was excuse me 10, we bought a house. My dad bought a house, and we lived there during the school year. What was I about to say?
Yeah, what was it like being a boy in that school? What was your experience like?
Well, there was about 25 to 30 kids in each class, and it was I had a good school. Good. I'm trying to reflect on things that had some good teachers. Although kids always teacher had the comment about a teacher. Well, it was my
Did
seventh grade teacher who kind of keyed in on me and thought I was special for some reason. That
did you
helped.
find the academics to be pretty easy? Like, did they ever consider like pushing you forward in having you skip a grade or anything like that? Or was it really not until that seventh grade teacher that you started to say like, huh, stuff that might come hard for other folks like physics and engineering and whatnot is a real interest and comes natural to me. Like,
Well, actually, my second, I went the first grade and I had no trouble learning to read and write. The second grade, my mother homeschooled me. In the
why did
third
she
grade,
why'd she do that? Why'd she bring you back home and
well,
homeschool
actually,
you?
my mother, backing way up, taught school before she married my father. She got her diploma for school, the teacher from the normal school in Lewiston,
Hmm,
and
hmm,
she taught a one-room schoolroom out in the Sandhills south of Indian Valley.
hmm,
That's where my dad met her,
hmm, hmm.
and they were in their mid-20s when they married. They got married, and they at least had $500 because they bought out a homestead for $500. That was my dad's start.
That was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
So, when you were a freshman, your freshman year in high school, you actually transferred to Lewiston High School. And if you guys don't know where that is, there's two towns. One's called Lewiston in Idaho, and then you cross over the river and you're in Clarkston. And if those names sound familiar, these are two towns that were named after the explorers Lewis and Clark, which is pretty cool. But you transferred to Lewiston High School because council just didn't really offer the math level that you needed.
Mm.
But also, I know that you were named the most intelligent student. I can't believe that they even they would never do that these days where they say that kid is the most intelligent, but you were named the most intelligent kid your freshman year. And so my question for you, Ralph, about that is how did them denoting you in front of all those other kids as this is the most intelligent kid that we've got, how did that recognition affect your confidence and how did that affect your direction academically?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that naming me the most intelligent had any effect on me. It was just they had kind of this thing they voted on most of them, but they figured the most intelligent, and I had all A's, So I was I was the only student in the freshman class, or in the whole school, that just got all A's. And but I transferred for my senior year. I only did my senior year at
Only your
Lewiston.
senior. Okay.
Only I did my freshman, sophomore, and junior year in council. And I got to the end of my junior year, and I asked the principal if they were going to offer trigonometry or solid geometry in the following year, and he said they would not. So I went to my dad and I said, I'd really like to go to school in Lewiston to get these subjects. I'm going to need them because I'm going to college. And he says, well, we've got my dad's parents for years lived in Lewiston. And I had aunts and uncles and lived there. There were more Longfellows in the Lewiston phone book those days than there were in San Diego when we moved there. Anyway, he said, sure, hell. So I lived with my aunt and uncle who were childless, and I was their child, basically, for my senior year at Lewiston.
Did they love having you, Ralph? Was that because they had no kids themselves? Did they enjoy having this senior boy in their home that year?
I don't know. My uncle was there. Was the oldest brother. My dad had my dad came from a family of 9 kids, and he was the second. And Richard and that I stayed with was the oldest.
So if we
He never got married till he was at least 50.
wow. Wow. Pretty unheard of back in the day
Yeah.
too.
Anyway, that's
So if we're looking back at that time, just a few more stories before we kind of jump over to your university years. I heard a story that you were really good, really talented at shooting blackbirds, and that those blackbirds would find themselves like in a hayloft, and you had like a little secret trick on how to be pretty accurate in doing that. Tell us a little bit about that.
well. I had a little single shot 22 rifle, short barrel, is only about 2 feet long. But I had some ammunition that was called 22 birdshot, and it's just like a small shotgun shell. And I was using it, and it's fairly rare. And I don't remember where I got it. I think I got it in someplace.
So it's like a
Yeah.
shotgun shell, but it's the size of a 22 caliber bullet.
Yes.
Okay. So it's got like it doesn't have a lot of shot inside it then.
No, the shot's pretty small too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what happened there with those blackbirds and
Well,
why?
the guys I was with didn't realize I was using birdshot.
Okay.
So I was hitting, and those blackbirds are hard to hit with a 22.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, by the time that shot spread, your target, like you didn't have to be as accurate because you had a
Right,
much larger width
right.
there. Yeah.
That was just one afternoon when I worked. That was that summer when I was 15. I worked at the apple orchard
Mm,
instead of
yeah.
after.
Was
That's
that the Mesa apple orchards?
That was the Mesa apple orchard, which at that time was huge. Apple orchard had
Mm.
thousands of acres of apples. One of the largest apple orchards in the country.
Ralph, tell me a little bit about that deluxe applesauce trick. What's that all about?
Oh, that was well. That summer, one day we had to label applesauce. They made applesauce in the fall every year. Anyway, they had a warehouse full of cans of applesauce, and a big semi truck came in with a box of labels for Safeway. It was a Safeway truck. So the foreman said, "We're labeling apples today." So they set up the labeler, and we spent all morning labeling applesauce. About little bit after lunch, he stopped the machine and he said, we got to label some Deluxe now. So they took the little box of labels out, brought in another set of labels called the Deluxe brand. And I remember the guy that ran the forklift that was bringing the cases of unlabeled cans to the labeler asked the foreman where to get the Deluxe applesauce. And the foreman says, same place we get the others. They're all the same. So I learned a lesson that the label doesn't necessarily tell you what's in the can.
Yeah.
And it was, I next time I was in Weiser, I went to the Safeway store and I went there just specifically to find out the applesauce. And sure enough, that Deluxe applesauce was 3 cents a can more than the regular applesauce.
Well, that sounds like marketing 101, right? So adding value through that perception. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've got all these really rich experiences, and then you decide to head off to Moscow, Idaho, and University of Idaho. And is it, pardon me, is it Moscow or Moscow? Which one is it again?
If
Moscow?
you live there, it's Moscow.
Yeah, Moscow. That's right. And Moscow's in Russia, is that right? So Moscow,
Yeah, I
Russia,
guess.
Moscow, Idaho. Okay. So you're in Moscow. I got it right the first time.
Moscow.
And Moscow. What made you decide that University of Idaho in Moscow was going to be your place for university? And did you decide to like apply to other universities? Did you ever think about going outside of the state? You're like a smart kid. Not that University of Idaho is a bad school, but the world's your oyster. What made you decide that University of Idaho was going to be the place for you?
Well, first of all, in 1954, anybody who graduated from a high school in Idaho was admitted to the university if they wanted to.
So you didn't really even have to, you didn't have to have a set of grades.
No,
You're in, you apply, you're in.
all you had to do was graduate from a high school in the state in 1954.
But you didn't need that. You're the straight A student, meaning that you could have gotten in on merit if you wanted to.
Yeah,
So,
I know that. And I figured I could afford it. I was on my own money wise.
yep.
I had made my money working for the Forest Service. I had a few $1,000s. Of course, didn't take a whole lot of money in those days to go to the university.
That's right. It's very different today, isn't it? So why did you choose University of Idaho? It was basically because that was it was closer to home.
Yeah,
You knew that you
it's
could
my
get
home
into
state.
it. Did you apply for any other universities? Did you
No,
apply for Stanford? No?
no.
No. So what was it like going from apple orchards to hay lofts, shooting blackbirds, to the sheep ranch, to you're now in Moscow. You're with a lot of other like-minded kids now. These kids are coming out of the woodwork from all over, maybe from some of the bigger cities like Boise or Coeur d'Alene, and they're all converging on the University of Idaho. And you're studying physics there. What was it like being there? Was that a bit of a shift for you? Was that something exciting?
It should have been, but it wasn't.
Mm,
I didn't have to really study hard in high school. Everything came pretty easy. School was difficult. It took a lot of effort. My problem in those when I was 18 years old was I wasn't ready to exert a lot of effort.
mhm.
I wound up getting very poor grades and
How long did that last? Those poor grades, did it last for years, or was that just like a
one
semester thing?
semester,
One semester.
after one semester and the start of a second semester, I finally decided that I need to cool down. I need to get my head on my shoulders the right way. And I joined the Navy. Then I told my folks I joined the Navy.
So is this like some ROTC program where you're in college and you join the Navy at the same time?
No, I dropped out of school and I dropped out of college and joined the Navy and wound up coming to San Diego
Was that because you were so poor in school? Is that and are you like, this just isn't a good fit for me? Like, what made you decide to join the Navy?
Well, I was running out of money.
Mhm,
I needed some. I either had to go to work, and I knew that if I joined the Navy, I could learn something.
mhm, mhm,
There'd be something to learn.
mhm.
So I joined the Navy.
So your grades are slipping. I think that that was, like, coinciding with the ski season, so you were a bit of a skier, is that right?
I was a skier. Yes, I
Did you ski, like, what resorts? Were you, like, skiing Brundage, or where were you?
used to. We used to drive every weekend to Red Mountain, British Columbia, for the hill, and that was before Schweitzer. If we had Schweitzer, then we'd be at Schweitzer.
Gotcha. So
I skied in high school, not at Brundage because Brundage wasn't a ski resort when I was in high school. We skied right there at McCall on the jump, where the jump is. But
I've taken my kids, sledding right where you're talking about, but I've, spent a lot of days at, Brundage over in McCall. It's a good place to ski. Good, good, hot springs over in Brundage as well. I mean, over in McCall. I don't know if you've hit any of those hot springs, but they're packed
used
full of them.
to Craigbaum Hot Springs hit that at least 2 or 3 times a year. And then Zim's Plunge, just north of Meadows, was a big plunge. And
Well,
Starkey at Council.
Starkey, yeah, sure. Sure. Ralph, that's one thing you and I have in common. When I was in high school, I did really well. And I remember my senior year, my mom said to me, she said, "You have not brought a single piece of homework home all year." And I said, "Well, I just get my head down during the class at the end and I just get it all done then and there because I just didn't want to do it out of class, out of school." And that ability that I had academically meant that I was not prepared for college. I did not know how to study. I didn't know how to take tests really. And so I remember my first year at university thinking I was just going to breeze through that. It was going to be as easy as high school. I remember struggling myself, and if I wouldn't have gotten my act together, I wouldn't have finished university either. But it's one of those things where my GPA progressively got better and better. And, later in life, when I was a full fledged adult and my frontal lobe was working properly, I went back to university and got an MBA. I was able to get a 4.0, and I felt so convicted during that master's experience thinking I could have done this as a younger person, but I was busy playing basketball and hanging out with my friends and playing frisbee in the quad and rollerblading and skiing and snowboarding and having so much fun and just wasn't taking it as seriously as I should. So I can relate to that. I really struggled my first few quarters. I did pretty poorly.
Yeah. I think my dad asked me one time, "Don't you have any homework?" And I said, I had the same kind of answer. No, I, I had it all done. Got it all. I don't need it home. I didn't need anything.
Yeah, I was the same way. Hey, so when you were in the Navy, you told me a little story about how the Navy band director really refused to remove African American musicians from the parade lineup in Mississippi. I want to tell us a little bit about that and how did that impact you?
Well, it let me know how those people thought down there, and I started kind of looking around because I was stationed at Millington for going to ATA school, aviation electronic technician, 9 month school, and I played in the volunteer band. We had played Memphis celebration, marched in Memphis, and we played at a football game. We even bussed over to Little Rock and did the same thing in Little Rock. But when we got to Jackson, Mississippi, it was a different climate. But when we pulled in with the buses, we had two full buses of the band. We went to the university and had lunch at the cafeteria. And the people in the cafeteria looked at us really strange, and we wasn't sure why. But when we got ready to get ready to march in the parade, and we were in our staging area, the band director was missing. Pretty soon he showed up and he had us gather around and he told us he said I met with the director of the homecoming, and he asked me to remove the black children, the black boys, from the band to parade for the parade, and we were going to actually march at halftime, had a halftime performance, and I told him that the black boys don't play, the band doesn't play, and the band didn't play. We got on our buses and went back to Millington, and and it really brought home to me how bad it was in the South in those days. That was 1956 or
How
55.
did
That was 55.
how did the
Jackson, Mississippi.
how did the how did the band respond to that? You know, some of them were probably thinking, "Man, I really wish we could have been in that parade." But at the same time, our band director is standing up for what is right.
Yeah,
How did folks feel about that?
I think we were proud of our band director in
Mhm,
the main
mhm.
for putting them what we call put it. He put them in their place, didn't he? They
Yeah,
don't. They didn't get.
yeah. You know, it's interesting. It's sad to say that, like, when we're in the midst of decisions like that, Ralph, it can feel a bit ambiguous, right? And
Yeah,
clearly, as we're able to look back at history and hindsight, we can see that a decision like that was so honoring and, frankly, the right one of basically saying, hey, we're all created equal and this is a band and we respect every person in this band and it's all of us or none of us. I mean, these are core tenets that the vast majority of America agrees to now. But as you said, this was just entrenched racism primarily in the south of the US based off of, you know, centuries of culture and treatment of people. And that was a cancer that was going to take time to die in the South. And folks were not ready to be challenged like your band director did, but he did. And so it's neat to hear stories like that from the 50s.
there was a young black man in our cubicle when I stayed in the Navy in Millington, who was from Sacramento, California. Talk about shock. He was really shocked in the South. I,
Absolutely. You would be. So, talking about, so you're in the Navy, but you do finish university, am I right? So
oh yeah.
you finished
What happened was while I was going through ATA school, they ran some tests, or they had me take some tests outside of the school, the Navy, and they said, "Well, you'd be qualified for this project." And then they sent me to a psychiatrist who grilled me, and he said I would be. So they sent me to. They said, "Okay, we want you to be an officer, so we have to send you to OCS, not OCS, NROTC. So you'll have to get into a college that has an NROTC program." Well, that was easy. Idaho had an NROTC program. So I went back to Idaho.
That's great. And then your senior year, Ralph, you interview with a company called General Dynamics. Tell us a
Yes.
bit about that company, what you're interviewing for, and uh, essentially, what did they offer you?
Okay, I will back up. I have to tell you the story. When I was being interviewed for NROTC, I had a commander who obviously was from Georgia. You could tell by the accent. He says, if you're selected for this program, you'll get books, tuition, and $50 a month. and that's not enough to live on. How would you support your income? And I says, well, I've had excellent education in electronics in the Navy. I could get a job as a TV repairman. He says, oh, yeah. Well, if you can't find a job as a TV repairman, what are you going to do? I says, well, if I really had to, I think my father would help me. He says, oh, what's your father do? And I said, he's a rancher. He says, oh, well, how big is his ranch? And I said, 3,600 acres. And he said, do you mean 3,600 acres? And I said, yes, sir. He says, well, I guess he could help you then, couldn't he? It was the end of that conversation.
Perspective.
Anyway, got back to the university.
And then General Dynamics came.
Oh, General Dynamics.
They interviewed you. What was that all about?
I'm going to say I did get a job as a TV repairman.
Okay.
And I was working for Haddock and Laughlin there in Moscow. And I was not only doing TV repair, but maintaining the city cable system, TV cable, and working on the antenna system that they had, learning about antennas. And I was fascinated. So, which led to, during the interview with General Dynamics Pomona, the interviewee says, well, what's your main interest? And I said, electromagnetic wave propagation, because I was doing some experimenting on my own to get rid of ghosts on the TV. So I was playing with the radiation, and he said, we've got just the place for you at General Dynamics. I didn't know what he meant, but when I got down there, I found out I was in the antenna group and working on antennas. I first had to learn what the antennas they had, how they worked, and then I got to design them.
So that brought you down to Southern California, am I right?
Yes, in 1960.
Which is where you're at today. So can you believe you've been there for 66 years? You've been in Southern California?
I've been in Southern California since 1960.
Unbelievable.
66 years.
66 years. So you were working for General Dynamics Pomona, and then you came to work for Ryan. Tell us a little bit about that. Ryan Aeronautical.
Some of my design work at GD was phased array. And I saw an ad from General Dynamics, and I forget what it was in, looking for people with experience in phased array antenna design. So I sent them my resume. They sent me a letter and said, come on down. We'll pay transportation. Come down to San Diego and interview. Spend a day interview, which I did. And they made me a great offer. So I tendered my resignation at General Dynamics and came to Ryan Aeronautical in San Diego.
Did you?
I enjoyed Ryan because it's an old classic. Ryan built the Spirit of St. Louis.
Oh, neat! Wow!
And so it's a long
phenomenal history.
Yeah, it built a lot of trainers, PT-22s for training during World War II, and they built a single engine private plane the Navy on after that. Anyway, there was a big plant down right by the airport, but there was another plant up on the hill where they did the electronics work, and the antenna group was there. That's where I worked for.
Did you know, Ralph, at the time that when you basically rose your hand and said, yeah, I'll work for Ryan Aeronautical, that was going to be a path that led you to work on the Apollo mission? Did you know that? Or did you just think, no, this is just a natural progression based off the talents and background that I have?
It was a natural progression. I didn't even know that Ryan built the landing radar when I went to work for them.
When did you first hear about that?
Well, I I don't know. I don't remember hearing about it at all until I wound up in the director of engineering's office. Yeah, I guess I knew they were doing something. Turns out, see, when I came down and I started to work at Ryan, I was in the antenna group, and they didn't have a particular project to assign me to, so they let me do some testing of stuff I wanted for my own, and ideas that I had in my head. And then they called me and he says, "Well, we need some tests run on these diodes, and since you're really available, we'll let you run the tests." So I ran a bunch of tests and wrote a report on what the test results, and I submitted. And then I went back to my other task that I had, and I got a call from the director to go to the director of engineering's office. So I went to the director of engineering's office, and my report was on his desk. And he said, "I read your report, and you're telling us the they won't work for what we're doing." And I said, "Well, that's what the report says. Whatever." He says, and he kind of went through a little bit of history about what it was. They were duplicating the system they used on the Surveyor, which was a landing radar for the Surveyor, but they had a much stringent requirement. And the diodes they were using on the Surveyor would not work for the diodes they're using on the Apollo. He says, "What do you think we ought to do?" And I says, "I think you need to redesign the front end." And he kind of hemmed and hawed and says, "Yeah, you're right. And now you're working for me."
What happens, Ralph? Okay, so a few questions. First question is like, I find it amazing how, and I don't know if folks know this or not, but we're in a space race with the Russians.
Yes.
And this is basically showing like superpower supremacy and who's jockeying for the top spot in the world. And the space race was kind of like a flag out there saying, hey, if we can do this, it's just basically showing that we're the superior culture and country. And frankly, we were getting some firsts, but the Russians were getting a ton of firsts too, like the first man in space, not an American, it was a Russian. And so I'm assuming that the Russians at the same time are trying to get a man on the moon. Are they looking into the same type of technology that you are, but we're just like in a siloed place where you're of course not working with scientists from the USSR? What did that look like? Did you feel like was your world wide and you were engaging with like Europeans, like the British and Canadians, and everyone's kind of come together? Or were you just in this small little Ryan Aeronautical group that's like, we got to figure out how we can make the lunar landing radar work? Like, what did your world look like when you were trying to figure out this problem?
I reflect back that Kennedy gave us the goal to put a man on the moon before the end of the century. Or not century.
Boy, we got close.
We
Five and a
did.
half months.
We did. We accomplished it. It was 69. It wasn't 70.
It was 69.
January 1, 1970 was our target to beat, and we did.
Yeah, by what? About 5.5 months or so, right?
Right. So it was really, anytime we heard that kind of talk about behind schedule or tight, where it was the goal that had been given us to accomplish. I don't know that we were even worried about the Russians putting a man on the moon.
Uh-huh.
We were only worried about and
You were just dead set on doing your job.
we just did it with brute force too.
Uh-huh.
You were making a comment with Artemis.
Yeah.
Artemis is technically far superior to what we did. And in the 50 years, the difference in technology is phenomenal.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah, they say, I mean, so folks understand what Ralph was working with, they say that the computing power Ralph, that we have in our singular iPhones is greater than all computing power that you had with NASA to get man on
Yes.
the moon. So
Or
from your
have watches now that have more power in them than computers did.
Yeah, that's right. Then these big mainframes. So for you, what did it look like for you to redesign the front radar system? And I'm assuming that this is probably all super top secret stuff that you're working on at the time. You could share with us now, of course.
Well, the landing radar was not top secret.
Okay.
The front end was the problem was the system was a this is getting technical, a zero IF Doppler system. So any noise, static noise, white noise of any form messes up the signal at low frequencies. So I was looking for a way to reduce the front end noise.
And from your side, Ralph, what did you do to ensure that that new design would perform reliable in like lunar conditions? Like, how did you know that what you were building was going to do the job once it came down to it?
Well, you don't have any problem between atmospheric and non-atmospheric conditions for electrical signals, but we had to find something that electrically was low noise that we could use. There, it was a question almost didn't use what I wound up using because some people thought it wouldn't survive in space.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh,
What made them think that?
it's germanium, a material, an atom that has characteristics that that too active, I believe, is something. But anyway, it works. We need a diode for the front end, like even the old receivers back in the days when they were crystal receivers, they used a
Hmm.
crystal or a diode.
Sure.
We needed a diode in the very front end, and it was the choice that we got, with which we called the back diode. And it's a back diode because it works in reverse, as to most diodes. Uh,
What would you say, Ralph, like as you were building this, how confident were you in that final system before they launched it? Were you pretty confident that what you built is going to do the job
yes,
on the moon? Why were you so confident?
because I'd run so many tests. We'd run all kinds of electrical tests, temperature tests, vacuum tests. We had a large vacuum chamber at Ryan that we put the system in and make sure it works in the chamber in a vacuum. We vibrate it, make sure it'll withstand the vibration of the rocket, the rocket that is fired during the landing to keep it from falling has a big bell. The landing radar is mentioned right beside it. I had that bell and a landing radar on a pedestal, and we shook that bell with the same noise like it was an exhaust.
Mm,
So
mm.
just all of the tests that we ran gave us the confidence.
And Ralph, to use that landing radar, and you're going to have to do some education for me, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to apologize here. We know the first two men on the moon. The first one, of course, was Neil Armstrong. Number two was Buzz Aldrin. And then there was another astronaut that actually had to stay in the lunar module. What was his name again? Do you remember?
No, 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 no.
What's that?
Ah,
I can't remember. Okay, so I'll look that up. Horrible that I forgot that. But that astronaut, did you have to teach him how to use the radar system, or was the radar system, was it like an automated system that was just a part of the lunar landing module, and
the
it kind
analogy
of
I can
it
draw
just does itself?
the analogy I can draw to you as to what how the astronauts use the landing radar is the same way you use the speedometer in your car.
Mm,
You look at the dial and see what it reads.
mm,
Now, there was a dial, not a dial, but a number on a display in the lunar module during the landing. The pilot, which is in this case is Neil Armstrong, is looking out the window and running the controls.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The co-pilot, Buzz Aldrin, is looking at the display from the landing radar and telling the pilot how high he is and how fast he's going,
Got it.
because it's displayed right there, and he's reading those numbers, right? And the communication is verbal.
Okay. So it basically is just reading in a system that they relied on during the process. And folks,
That's correct.
I got it a bit wrong. So the two guys that landed on the moon, of course, were Neil Armstrong. Everyone's heard of him. And then Buzz Aldrin, also very famous. And then Michael Collins,
Collins.
he remained in lunar orbit. So he didn't actually get onto the moon. He basically was orbiting while the two guys were down below, because they had, of course, had to eject out of lunar orbit once they were done. So I know another thing, Ralph, is that you basically had a chance to meet these astronauts before they became world famous, and you spent time with them as they came and they visited with you and other engineering teams that supported them. What was it like meeting them? Did you know when you were meeting Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and the other astronauts that these were going to be the Apollo 11 first men on the moon type of thing? Or were these just run-of-the-mill astronauts? You didn't know exactly what NASA was up to, and you were just kind of showing these guys the systems that were going to get them onto the moon. What was it like meeting them, and what was the context for meeting those guys?
Well, we had one detail meeting, and I held that with with Neil Armstrong. Other astronauts I met at Bethpage, Grumman Bethpage in Long Island, where the lunar module was assembled, and the landing radar tests on the lunar module were there, and astronauts would visit Grumman and go through training there with the lunar module. I met some there, but I don't even remember who they were. They were busy. We were busy. But I had to remember Neil Armstrong because he came to Ryan to see how the landing radar worked. And it was my job to show him what it was and how it worked. We had a lot of meetings. The thing that impressed me the most, I think, well, two things. One, he asked a lot of intelligent questions.
Mm.
I don't remember exactly what they were, but I just remember when I walked away from the meeting, I thought, yeah, he's really aware. And but the thing that impressed me, I don't know if you remember the Gemini phase of the whole Apollo program. Neil Armstrong was one of the Gemini astronauts, and they docked with a booster stage that was locked. And it was a docking exercise to see if they could dock and how they would dock. And they docked and then went into uncontrollable tumbling. They had to unlock, try to regain stabilization. And because that they had an emergency landing in the Pacific instead of waiting to go to the Atlantic. I'm sitting beside him at this meeting and I'm thinking, he said this guy's been up there. He's been in an emergency up there and solved it. Well, if we have an emergency, he'll solve it.
A lot of confidence. A lot of confidence in him as an astronaut. So, with Neil Armstrong, did you know that he was going to be the first man on the moon when you were briefing him in this meeting, or
No,
you did? He had no clue.
no clue.
So your systems, Ralph, get integrated into the lunar landing module, and we, in July of 1969, just as you shared so well, were ready to go. And on the 20th of that month, we descend down onto the moon for the very first time in human history, and we put a man on the moon. Where were you on that momentous day?
I was in our family room watching the television, like 2 o'clock in the morning. I forget what time it was here, but it was middle of the night.
How did you feel? How did you feel?
I felt really good. I knew it would happen. I had another similar experience earlier with Apollo 10. You know, Apollo 10 went to the moon and orbited. So did Apollo 8. Apollo 8 went to the moon, just went around and just came back like Artemis did. But Apollo 10 actually orbited the moon a few times, descended slightly. They turned on the landing radar and it locked up on the surface of the moon.
So you knew by Apollo 10 that Apollo 11, your system was going to work.
Yes. Our requirement is somewhere in the books, the requirement that the landing radar had the ability to lock up onto the surface of the moon at 50,000 feet. In other words, they had to be looked off at 50,000 feet on their descent.
So when
It locked up, Apollo 10 locked up at 100,000 feet.
mm, mm, more than enough.
It's what we call a 3 dB advantage.
So Ralph, when it's going for the real deal, we're getting Neil and Buzz onto the surface of the moon. What were you listening for, watching for as the radar locked onto the surface? Or were you just watching the feed like everybody else? And did you just have to assume that the system was working properly?
No, I was listening to Buzz Aldrin because he was
So,
reading the info off the landing radar.
hmm. And what was going through your mind during those final moments before they landed right on that, right on the moon?
Just, I guess I was just listening to those, hearing those words down at 10, down at whatever, listening.
How'd you
It
feel?
was
How'd you feel when you heard the final words? The eagle has landed. How did that make you feel?
good, of course. Yeah. I had been not working on the landing radar, had been working on other items. I was taken off of the landing radar program at Ryan before we shipped the first production unit.
Hmm. So when did you think, Ralph, from your side, when did you have like clear, sober reflection on the fact that what you'd been a part of on that team, and I love that you basically dissecting their plan and saying, hey, this is just not going to work the way you got it tooled up right now. You need to rebuild it. When did it sink into you that the work that you'd been a part of and the talents that you had been used to make human history, right? This is a moment in human history that will never ever be forgotten. When did it sink in that you'd been a part of something so monumental like that?
I don't know. I've never. I know I've just been one of thousands of people who've been involved. We've all played a part. I think of the technicians that work for me. They really put their heart into their work. Everybody, especially, and it was a team, a massive team effort.
Mm, mm. They say when he landed, he said, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. And you were one of thousands that put Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. But that one giant leap for mankind, you were mankind. You were a part of that story.
Yeah,
And that's pretty. That's pretty incredible that you were born at the right time, with the right interests, with the right inclination, that you did poorly in college, that forced you to go off to the Navy, that brought you back to Idaho, that taught you to work on some antennas, that finally brought you to Ryan and brought you to this experience to be able to add the knowledge that you had acquired in a very unique, almost serendipitous way to build a tool to get these two guys on the planet.
Yeah,
I mean, on the moon, pardon me, on the moon.
on the moon.
It's incredible. Ralph, it's incredible. You know what I find amazing
Well,
too is that I don't know if you know this, Ralph, but they brought a piece of the Wright brothers plane with them, and they had that with them during this landing. And it's just absolutely shocking that within 1 century, the very start of a century, and then 2/3 done with that century, we'd move from many people being skeptical that aviation was even possible. Some folks didn't even believe it was possible for a human to fly in a plane, let alone get into space, all the way to putting a human being on the moon. That is an incredible amount of sophistication, technology, and advancement in humanity in such a short amount of time.
and we should read our sci-fi authors, because one of them is going to be as smart as Jules Verne was over 100 years ago.
It's good.
If you read Jules Verne, he predicted it all.
That's right. He sure did. And that was back in like the 1870s, I think, something around then,
Yeah,
about 100 years before. So, Ralph, you lived through lightning storms and lookout towers. I know that's the case. You
yeah.
also survived really dangerous fire jumps. How would you say, like, all those tensions and all that adventure growing up in the jobs you had and the life you led, how would you say that that compared to Apollo 11 on emotional level? How did that tension compare? Were you prepped for it? Was it like old easy hat because you'd been through so much? Or was Apollo 11 and the landing on the moon, was that a bigger, deeper, hold your breath moment for you?
I don't know. I don't. I don't recall having quote moments, whether there was the Apollo landing being a big moment. It was a big moment for everybody. Maybe I was excited. I knew I'd been involved, along with thousands of others. Things like finding smokes from the lookout tower and calling for smoke jumpers, or even some of the work I did with the Forest Service was just those 3 summers I spent with the Forest Service. Amazing.
Absolutely amazing. So, did you ever get a chance to meet Neil Armstrong or Buzz Aldrin again after they got back from the moon?
No,
Hmm.
I was scheduled to go to the launch of Apollo 17, but one of my other projects that I was working on at the time had a critical moment and I couldn't go.
Were either of those astronauts on Apollo 17?
No.
No. It's interesting how Neil Armstrong really batted away the limelight afterwards. I think he went on to become a professor at a university somewhere in the Midwest, and he wasn't really interested in interviews and talking about his experience being the first man on the moon. But he surely, regardless of how much limelight he wanted to or didn't want to be in, it was such a significant moment, just like you shared, for all of us. And that's why connecting with him and hearing him share that story was so important to us. So, Ralph, you work with a team, you get the man on the moon, you create the systems that, like you said, locks into the lunar surface at 100,000. Goodness, that's crazy. Well done, you. And then you move from Apollo to Viking Mars missions. how did your work on Apollo lead to your role in the Viking Mars mission, and what did that look like? I know we're jumping to a new mission, but tell us a bit about that.
Well, it was a different system, but it worked. The Viking got there. There was a Martin Marietta, not in Georgia, but at Colorado Springs,
Mm.
built the Viking landing radar. Well, they didn't build we built the landing radar for them. Ryan did.
And for you, what did it look like for you on the Viking mission? You were
I
you
was
were
just a design specialist that kind of looked over their shoulders
okay.
and either told them they were doing it right or wrong.
And remind us a little bit about the Viking Mars mission. What was that? Was that basically just us sending a probe out to take photos of the surface? We weren't landing Mars in the Viking missions, were we?
Yeah, the Viking 2 landed. Viking 1 didn't, but Viking 2 landed.
Did they attempt to land with Viking 1 and it
No,
failed?
no, it just orbited Mars.
Got it. Got it. So there was just like there's a bit of a difference with Viking because, of course, that was an unmanned landing on Mars. And so the technology and solutions that you guys had to build out were totally different than the
Yeah,
lunar landing.
but more akin to the surveyor landing, which I did not have a thing to do with. It was all over with when I got to Ryan. Ryan built the landing radar for surveyor
Hmm.
that landed on the moon.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That I have a picture that the Ryan artist painted for us. The It shows the surveyor. I forget which surveyor it was, and it shows the lunar module and the two astronauts. Now, there's an actual photograph that shows the surveyor, the lunar module, and one astronaut. Only shows one astronaut because the other one was running the camera.
Of course.
So it's unique. The painting was done before the Apollo was launched,
Hmm.
and that was from Apollo 12.
So you work on the Viking Mars mission, and then you start to take a lot of your learnings in technology and experience. And I think I remember you mentioning to me that you worked and adapted some systems for like minesweeping during the Vietnam War.
Well,
Remind me a bit about that.
there was a system. It was a commercial system called Radist, and it creates and actually creates like a grid that you can track left, right, you can track on for navigation and water or any place, but it requires two transmitters like
Hmm.
LORAN,
Hmm.
but it's commercial. And the idea was to militarize it and sell it to the Navy and get the Navy to buy it. So that system had a problem in that, well, we worked on it. I guess we never really sold it, but I worked on that at Ryan.
Hmm.
I was a project engineer on another classified project that pushed the edge on high frequency amplification for the jammers to jam radar systems.
Hmm. Ralph, would you say that through all of these experiences that you've had and the time that you've been able to work on Apollo and Viking, w- would you say that, like, as you moved off of space exploration and your career didn't engage in that as much, were you always still super interested in what NASA was up to and what the latest missions were up to? And as we started launching the space shuttle, and the International Space Station and getting back to the moon as we are right now, trying to get man on Mars. Did you stay interested in that? Did you keep your eye on that at all?
Oh, yes. I read, actually subscribed to a magazine called Aviation Week that came out weekly. We had a nickname for it. We called it Aviation Leak because there were articles in there that were classified, contained classified information that we.
That's a clever name. That's a clever name. I love it. So, Ralph, you've lived a really interesting life. You've lived a really long life. You've lived a very varying life. And I'd love to just, as we work to close this episode up, I'd love to hear a little bit more about some other passions in your life. And one of those is sailing. You've served as the Commodore of the Coronado Yacht Club, and sailing has been a really important part of your life. How did that come about? Why sailing? And yeah, why was that something that really stood out to you and something you really grabbed a hold of?
I guess it was about 1972 that a friend of mine at work said, "Why don't you come join me for a sail? We can just sail out." He took me sailing on his boat. We went out to Whistler, which is buoy number 1 at San Diego Bay, which is out in the ocean. Turned around, came back, and I was hooked. It was
Why were you hooked? What did you love about sailing? What
it's
resonated
just
with you?
first of all, you're in a boat and it's moving
Uh-huh.
and there's no motor running.
Yep.
There's just the wind. You are physically using the wind to move that boat any direction you want to move it.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And depending on how, and there's the technique of the sails. You learn that the sails have to be set a certain way to get a good speed. So it really hooked. I gave up skiing when I started sailing.
Were you skiing like over at like Big Bear and Mammoth at that point, and you decided just to pack those skis up and just go out your back door and start sailing?
No, I was skiing Alta.
Okay. Yeah.
I had friends in Salt Lake that we could fly up and ski Alta.
You know what else I love about sailing too? I've only had a chance to do it a handful of times. But Ralph, I've got a good friend of mine here in the Puget Sound who owns his own yacht, and I'll help him prepare it for the beginning of the season and take it out with him. And I always ask lots of questions, as you're probably not surprised to hear. I've always been doing that. And one question I always ask him was like, how far can you go on a gallon of diesel? And holy smokes, to displace a boat through water is incredibly expensive in regards to both money and power to do it. And that's what's really neat about sailing is that you're harnessing as you shared the wind and you're moving that boat, displacing that boat through the water where it just it costs a fortune to run something like a diesel powered yacht.
A diesel powered, yeah.
Really does.
My boat had sails on it.
Exactly. Exactly. So I know that you once sailed out to Hawaii.
Yes.
I've only flown to Hawaii a few times, but I know leaving SeaTac and I head up over the water, I'm like, goodness, it is going to be a long flight. It was during the day of nothing but blue underneath me before I get to this small chain of islands in the middle of nowhere and land on it. What stood out for your voyage to Hawaii? Because that's a lot of water and a lot of time to get there.
Yeah, and I went on one of our neighbor's boats, 42-foot Tiana. It he I concluded afterwards that he was not a sailor because he he made a few mistakes and he couldn't run the radio. He could not understand the single-sided radio where he kept stepping on the operator. He kept stepping on the so I finally wound up running the radio. It took us too long to get there because we had to take down the headsail and put the main part wheel down at night.
How long did it take you to get to Hawaii?
18 days.
Is that how long should it take San Diego to Hawaii?
We should have taken about 12.
Were people getting nervous on day 13, or were you able to be in communication?
No, nobody. There was only 2 of us on board that really knew that we were. The owner and his cousin, who was from Switzerland, didn't know much about it. We got him there.
Once you got to Hawaii, what did you do? Did you just do a little R&R and spend some nice time there, or did you just...
I took a shower the first thing I did.
Did you guys not have a shower on the boat?
Oh yeah, we did, but there's nothing like standing under a shower that let the water run rather than standing under a bag of water that you've heated.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Did you just turn around and sail that back, or did you fly home?
No, I flew back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
He actually hired a man and a wife, a couple, to bring the boat back.
Mm.
And they had all the time in the world. They sailed it back.
So Ralph, another sailing journey you did was from Camden, Maine to Atlantic City, New Jersey. What was memorable about that one?
Going down the East River.
Where's that? Remind us where the East River is.
Between Brooklyn and Manhattan.
Got it. Got it. So like the Brooklyn Bridge crosses the East River?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Sailed under the Brooklyn Bridge.
That's a massive bridge, that Brooklyn Bridge.
And I was supposed to, everybody warned me of Hell's Gate, which is a channel just coming into the East River. But I had no problem going through there. And coming down the Long Island Sound.
Mm.
That took 2 days.
Were you able to
going through the canal, Massachusetts? You go through the canal at the right time, because if you go the right time, you don't go through the canal. The current in that canal, because of the tide, can run you backwards when you're running full speed ahead.
Mm. Sounds like a lot of adventures. And then how about serving as Commodore for the Coronado Yacht Club? What kind of responsibilities did you have when you were doing that?
Oh, I guess the big thing is to make sure all the parties are right.
Sounds about right.
Everything else is pretty well set and dried just by the numbers you do it. But the Commodore has to be at all the parties. And I did something unusual. Is all the yacht clubs have opening days, take off from the East Coast when they have to close the yacht club for the day or the year for the winter. They have to close down for the winter, and then in Southern California, we sail year round.
That's right.
So we have these opening days. They're usually in March and April and May. I attended another 28 opening days in Southern California because you invite all the yacht clubs, staff, there's the bridge, the Commodore, the Vice Commodore, and the Rear Commodore. This is called the bridge. So I went as far north as Santa Barbara to their opening day, did all of the clubs in Ventura and Los Angeles.
Some beautiful areas. Ralph, switching gears a little bit, you had a son, Mark, and
yes,
he passed away when he was a pretty young man.
When he was 12.
When he was 12 years old and he was a boy. Tell us a little bit about him and what he struggled with and how that impacted you and how that impacted the family. And tell us a little bit about him.
Mark had cystic fibrosis.
And what is that, Mark? What is that, Ralph?
It's a genetic disease. So Judy and I are both carriers of the gene, and it causes the cells in the body to act in a way that two things are devastating. One, your lungs can not normally cleanse themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You and I cough up mucus that collects from the lungs and brings all the bad stuff out of them and keeps them clean.
Mm-hmm.
That does not work in a child with cystic fibrosis.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to clean his lungs by patting and jarring all that mucus up with him laying down with his head low so that it would run out. It also stops the enzymes that your pancreas creates to digest your food. So the child with cystic fibrosis has to take enzymes local orally. There we go.
Orally.
Orally to digest their food.
Mm.
The unique thing about Mark, we had him tested when he was in the second grade. He had an IQ of 185.
That's amazing. What's a typical IQ?
Well, 100 is average.
100 is average. And then what percentage of the population has 185? I mean, it's going to be pretty small, right?
Very small.
Yeah.
The man that tested him said that Mark could probably do college calculus if given a chance at it.
Okay, so take a listen to this, Ralph. I'm just Googling this right now, and I don't know if you know this, but an IQ of 185, they call that extremely high. And that score and the rarity of it indicates someone that has the cognitive ability found in fewer than 1 in 100 million people, meaning that your son, Mark, was probably one of 2 to 3 people living in the US with that IQ.
Could be.
It says here he, he was smarter than 99.9999997% of the population. It's incredible.
Wow.
That's
I never looked at it that way.
They call it profoundly gifted. And they say that someone is profoundly gifted at 180. So 180 is very uncommon, but it's found, and 185 is just incredibly rare.
Well, he was a whiz at math, I can tell you that.
Mm.
And he understood.
They say, Ralph, that if you've got a score of 140 or higher, you're considered a genius. 180 and above is profoundly gifted, and there's only among the top handful of minds globally. It's pretty incredible.
Well, I've been tested. I'm 135.
Well, you're close to genius. You helped us get a man on the moon, but you're not quite a genius. You're 5 points
No,
off. You're close. I'm just happy if I'm double digits, Ralph. I'll be happy being double digits. Yeah. So with that amazing IQ, that's a very unique, special boy. If you don't mind me asking, Ralph, when he passed away at 12, which is really young, I know that now people with cystic fibrosis, they can get lung transplants and whatnot, live longer. But was it shocking when he passed away at 12? Or did you guys see it coming
Well,
because his health was just deteriorating so fast?
his health was deteriorating. It's amazing, but when he was diagnosed at 18 months, he was in the hospital and they told us he might live to be 3.
Hmm.
He had his one lung was plugged at that time, and he couldn't get it out at the hospital. We finally got him out of the hospital, and exercised him and got it cleared. Got his lung full. So he was uniquely popular. Let me put it that way, because he could help all the kids with their math, but he loved baseball, and he knew how baseball statistics were created.
Hmm.
He'd be listening to a game and somebody'd get a hit. He'd say, "Oh, that made his batting average go to so-and-so."
He would know the number.
He would know he'd know what the kids, he would know the players' average before, but what he did, he'd change it. He'd know what it would going to be after.
And his
He had two friends that he played with,
Mm.
and their father, these brothers, took all three boys to the barber one day. And Ray, the father, told me this story. He said, I waited till Mark was in the barber chair, and I said, Mark, what's the best hitter the Padres have? And Mark said, do you mean batting average, home runs, or RBIs?
It's a great rebuttal. It's a great rebuttal.
And Ray said, that stopped the barber right there.
No kidding.
And so I said, well, in each category, Mark. So Mark rattled off the numbers in each category.
Hmm.
He says, he says, I think the barber thought he had a midget in the chair.
I mean, it's a great response because Mark was right, Ralph.
I know
Dissecting it like that. Hey, you also mentioned to me that when he was in the hospital, he was the only person, the only kid that was getting the newspaper delivered. What did
That's right.
the doctors and nurses think of that?
Oh, they loved Mark.
Yeah.
He could converse with them in anything, you know.
Yeah.
Did I tell you the story about when I took him to the track?
No. No, let's hear about this gambling story with Mark.
He had been following the horses at Del Mar, and he every day he did paper bets, you know. And I told him, well, Mark, I'll take you to the track. Good. He wanted to go to the track, but he was in the hospital, and the track was it was the last day, so I got a pass for him. So our neighbor Bill and I picked up Mark from the hospital, took him to the track, got in. First race, the night before, I stopped by the hospital on the way home, and I said, well, Mark, I'm going to take you to the track tomorrow. How much money? I'll bet for you. How much money do you want me to take to bet for you? He says, $75 will be enough. Okay. So I made sure I had $75. Anyway, the day starts, and first race comes along. And I said, okay, what do I bet? He says, nothing worth betting on in the first race. Okay.
Why? Because he needs to see them run? Why would he say
No,
that?
he knew the horses. He knew the jockeys. He knew the trainers.
Hmm.
He'd been reading about them for a couple of months.
So statistically for him, he knew that it wasn't a good bet to bet on anything.
No, neither in the second race. You don't get the good races till the latter part of the day. These are just warm-up races of unknowns. Anyway, third race comes up. And he says, okay, Dad. He says, go to the Exacta window and baseball these three numbers. And I said, what? He said, just go to the Exacta window and tell the guy, baseball these three numbers, and then give him $30. Okay, which I did. And we lost. The fourth race comes up, and I forget how we bet, but it won, and we got a little money back. And the fifth race comes up, and he did the same thing on the Exacta, only it won $80.
Yes.
And
how did Mark feel about that win?
Yeah, that was well. He just took everything in stride.
Mm-hmm.
We left the day with about $80 ahead. And
now, Ralph, Mark was one of you had a couple kids, a few kids.
We had two older daughters. He had two older sisters.
So how was it for them when Mark passed away? Was that hard for the whole family?
It was hard for everybody. But I remember, Debbie was what, 10 years older than Mark? Yeah, and Ann was about 8 years older.
Yeah, it's tough.
The first problem was not a problem, but the first dramatic was letting the girls know what was wrong with Mark and that he probably wouldn't survive. and preparing them for it.
It's amazing how some folks come into our life for such a short amount of time and they make an impact that impacts us our entire lives. Like, it's been lovely to have had Mark around even to today, but in his short 12 years, he really made an impact on you and on the family, and sounds like on people
Yeah.
around him. Sure would be exciting, though, a young man with an IQ of 185, just imagining all of the things he would have invented and
Yeah.
created and
You
designed,
you
built.
never know.
You never know.
Everybody wonders
You never know.
what it'd be like if he survived.
Mhm. Yeah.
His service was held here at the chapel over at the mortuary, was standing room only.
Wow. Wow.
He made a big impact on the people in Coronado.
Wow.
He was known as Mr. Baseball.
Mr. Baseball. I have a friend who was a Padre pitcher for quite a few years. I'm sure he would have loved to, if this was at a totally different time. This is maybe 20 years ago or so. Probably would have loved to have heard Mark quote a bunch of stats about him.
Yeah. We have a great picture of Mark and Randy Jones.
Mm, mm, neat. Hey, well, Ralph, as we close this session up, I just want to thank you. I've got just a handful of questions for you, and then we're gonna close shop here. But just really appreciate you sharing your life story, your adventures, what brought you to that moment in history that we can all relate to, the Apollo 11 moon landing. And it's just so special that sometimes when we're in the middle of life, things can feel chaotic or maybe even purposeless. But there was an amazing purpose for this voyage that you walked on as a young man that brought you into the right skills and in front of the right audiences to be able to provide the talents and resources that you have. And that's encouraging for all of us because in the midst of it, like I said, life can be a bit of a head scratcher. But in closing, Ralph, just a question for you is, what would you say? And it doesn't have to be specifically like relating to like the mission itself or getting to the moon, right? But what would you say is like the greatest societal benefits that we have experienced through even daring to do something like getting a man on the moon? How has that benefited us as a humanity, us as a country, as a culture? What do you think?
Well, I think it's kind of opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that we can do those kind of things when we want to,
When we want to.
that we have the ability, the God-given ability to create things, make things happen, and do phenomenal things.
Mm, I love that. How about the Artemis mission that ironically, I think splashed down in your backyard, if I'm correct?
Yeah, just off the
uh,
coast here.
yeah, it's so interesting. You said like the technology and everything involved is far superior because we built on that 60 years or so of history. But at the same time, it's amazing how so much of like physics are physics, and that little module that the astronauts are in. I just it looks so similar to the same shapes that I've seen in the past, and seeing those parachutes deploy. I've seen parachutes deploy in the past, and it's amazing how physics will just say, "Yeah, you can get more technologically advanced, and your comms can be better, and your the DPI in your video could be a lot stronger, but still, you gotta get back into Earth through a very difficult atmosphere in a similar way. So some of that's similar, but how do you view the Artemis program in light of the Apollo experience? And what are your thoughts about us even bringing man back to the moon? Because, we got man to the moon in the late 60s and then kept on going back in the 70s. And then we just vacated. And now we got our sights back on the moon. What are your thoughts on Artemis and getting man back to the moon?
Well, it's the progressive step. It's just a step to the next phase, which is on to Mars.
Right.
We have to find someplace to go because someday this is not going to be a livable planet.
Mm.
We know that its history has changed, and in millions of years from now, or millions and millions of years from now, this piece of Earth will not be livable for the humans. So we have to be living someplace if we're going to survive as
Mhm.
a race.
And
So
so that,
that's a step. You know, we as people are born with some innate desires, and one is the survival. We have this craving to survive. We also have the craving to survive the species. And and this is part of our craving. We got to go there someplace.
hmm
It may be Mars, it may be someplace else,
hmm hmm
but we're
my
working
son,
on it.
my son and I watched The Martian on Saturday night. He's really into space exploration and was always into robotics. And he's incredibly intelligent and he's really into these things as well. And we watched The Martian for the first time together. And my, oh my, I don't know if you've seen that film, but it is pretty inhospitable. And it sure makes you appreciate Earth for what we have right now, an amazing place to live. But you're right. I mean, it is also innate in humanity to say, I want to just strive to go out further. Mars is just, moon's the first step, getting a base there, then a base on Mars, and then if we can figure out how to travel through space in a much faster way, it's out and beyond that.
You know,
So, final question for you, Ralph, is what advice would you give young engineers who want to work on world changing projects just like you did? What advice would you give them?
look for open doors.
Hmm. Yeah.
I didn't have to look so much as the doors opened up for me.
Yeah.
But when those doors open, step through.
Yeah. That's good. Ralph, the other thing I really like about you is that you really were doing your job. And what I mean by that is you were obsessed over how can I ensure a radar system locks onto the lunar surface and navigates them safely to a place where they land well. And you weren't, at least from my perspective, chatting with you for the last couple hours, you weren't obsessed with being a person that was a history maker as much as you were about doing a really, really good job to get this need met through the technology that you could help bring. And so I think that's just another great insight on life and on you is that regardless of where you find yourself, do your very best
Mhm.
in what's been put in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I appreciate that thought. Thank you.
Well, Ralph, we're about to wrap up. Are there any final things you'd like to share with us before we call it a day?
Well, it's been enjoyable. I enjoy chatting with you.
Likewise. Well, Ralph, it was a sincere pleasure. It was incredible hearing your story, being someone that is from the same part of the US, me being from Northeast Oregon, you from Southwest Idaho. It's so encouraging for me and encouraging for so many folks that our lives can unfold in really powerful and amazing ways and yours did and it still does and I'm just super thankful that you took some time to share with us the lunar landing Apollo mission, your part in that, and your story on how you got there and where you're at today. So,
Okay.
Ralph, thank you so much for being on the Widelands podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ralph.
Mhm. Thank you.
That's a wrap on the Wide Lens podcast. If today's episode broadened your view of history, please follow, rate, and review us. It makes a real difference. A heartfelt thanks to our guests for their story and to Sergei Shadrin for providing the music. Know someone who's witnessed a pivotal moment? Drop us a line at ideas@widelenspodcast.com. Their story could be next. Until next time, keep looking at history through the wide lens.